welcome back. Welcome to Brighter Morning with Bo. I'm Bo Tiwari, and my guest this morning in this second hour of Brighter Morning with Bo on MCTV is Dr. Roger Hosein. And let's get Roger to talk to us this morning. Dr. Hosein, how are you?
I'm good, Dr. Tiwari, and yourself?
Good. It's good to see you. I want to get straight into the issues because I know that you're a serious person, serious economist, and I know that as the budget comes up on October 4th, you must be thinking about it. So I will ask you, as my first question, what do you think the Minister of Finance must not ignore in his preparation of Budget 2022?
Very deep question to start off. So the first thing I would say, Dr. Tiwari, is that we have not really grown since 2019. And if I were the Minister of Finance, since 2009, and if I were the Minister of Finance, I would be very focused on how we could get this economy back into growth mode. So I would be thinking about what interventions I can make on the supply side and demand side of the economy that could give me economic growth, but not just economic growth. The economic growth has to have a sustainability element. The government could arguably run a fiscal deficit and generate economic growth. I am not talking about economic growth that is unsustainable, though. I am talking about economic growth that lingers on and lasts to the economy and that generates foreign exchange. And that's where the real challenge of the Minister of Finance lies. He has to come up with a menu that sees the economy experience 1%, 2%, even 0.5% growth right now will be good. But at the same point in time, it must not compromise a strained situation with the current account balance and in particular with the stock of reserves. He would have to see how this growth would boost backward and forward linkages with the economy. Now, one intervention that this current government did that I hope would yield some benefits and some fruits going forward is the Muruga E-Tech Park. And I think are you hearing me?
Yes, hearing you clear.
Right. And I think the backward and forward integration of that park in particular with the community of Muruga and with the agricultural community in general offers the prospect and the opportunity of greater value added with agricultural output. Because agricultural output for Trinidad and Tobago, if you look at the numbers, is very low. It is the lowest among the leading sectors. So if it is you could take the agricultural input and via agro-processing, increase the amount of value added and the worth of the commodity and even foreign exchange, then you would have done the Trinidad and Tobago economy a good favor from an economic growth perspective. Then there is this whole issue in the context of the depression that the Trinidad and Tobago economy finds itself in as to where to search for a starting point. You can't really look at natural gas because the production trends there the production there is decreasing. Oil production has not been buoyant for a little while. Yes, we may get a little fillip from oil prices and gas prices, but I submit that you don't want the economy to get growth because of price shocks. In the past, those price shocks have moved in on the one hand up and on the other hand down. So they tend to cancel out each other. And if in fact they may not cancel out each other, the negative may outweigh the positive. So I don't think we should be relying on price shocks to save the economy. What I think is we need to do is to look at which factor of production is booming. So gas is not booming, oil is not booming. We are not receiving a massive inflow of foreign direct investment. But we have benefited from in the last 5 years is an increase in immigrant labor. So a prudent policymaker, in my judgment, will sit in a corner and say, listen, if this is the only factor of production that is really booming, how do I tailor make? How do I change policy measures in such a manner and form that the economy capitalizes on the factor of production that is booming? Do I leave it willy-nilly? Do I allow them to work helter-skelter? Do I leave them unregistered? What is the consequence of a laissez-faire approach or letting the market sort out the opportunities for the immigrants? Well, that's basically the approach we have taken. And so the question, what we have to answer is, what has this approach given to the Trinidad and Tobago economy? So if you look at the data tracking matrices of the IOM, you would see that this approach of only registering about 16,000 immigrant workers, 16,525, out of a potential 120,000, as mentioned by former Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith, who was also former Minister of National Security, then you know that only about 15% of the Venezuelans are registered. And what is interesting is where they work. The Venezuelans work, according to the IOM data tracking matrix, in mainly the informal, non-tradable sector of the economy. And I have a fundamental problem with that, because if you work in the informal, non-tradable sector and you remit foreign exchange to your family in Venezuela, even if you buy it on the black market, even if you remit it in goods, then what you find is that you work in areas that compromise the stock of foreign exchange, and your consumption habit compromises the stock of our foreign exchange. And I think policymakers need to change both. It may, however, be easier to change the production side, the where you work side. And so I would take an approach that registers all the Venezuelan workers, assesses their skill stock, and I would even go so far as to consider sectoral worker permits, where I give work permits to a proportion of the Venezuelans to work in agriculture under import substitution industrialization conditions, or in manufacturing under appropriate, something similar to a passport condition, where they can add more value added than in the non-tradable sector of the economy, the informal part. So,
all right, let me stop you there, and let me summarize some of the things that you're saying, so the viewer would be clear about what you're saying. You're saying basically that we should spend some time on agriculture and its linkages, because our production is very limited now. The linkages with agro-processing can boost that production, and in the value added, we could make a contribution to development and growth. Secondly, you're saying that we have a factor of production that maybe we are just being laissez-faire about, which is the Venezuelan immigrants here. They are under-registered, they are here in high quantity, and they are working in the wrong place, which is to say the non-tradable sector, which contributes to foreign exchange loss. And what we should do is to try and capitalize on that booming factor of production, which is human capital assets from Venezuela, deploy them properly and see what happens. And there are other things that you say about that, but those are the two main points: the agricultural production, integration, and secondly, the use of this new factor of production that we have, which is under utilized, underrepresented in terms of official numbers, and badly deployed in the economy. Okay, let me ask you something. Our labor participation rate is very low. You have made this point over and over again. It's about 58%. It might be a little less now. And the labor participation rate is a problem here. How would what you are saying about the Venezuelans affect the labor component or the labor market in Trinidad and Tobago?
So that's a very good question, Dr. Tiwari. Now, if you take a careful look at the economy, you would probably leave that, after taking that deep, careful look, you would probably leave thinking that the short end of the market, or the market, is being compromised by the labor force. Now, what has been going on with our labor force? We have lost about between 2014 and 2020, using the latest available CSO data, we have lost about 50,000 workers from the labor market. Now, in another country or in other countries, if you lose that type of worker from the labor force, and I'm not talking about people retiring out of the labor force, I've already factored that out. If you look at the labor force, you would see that this 50,000 or so people I am talking about, they have left the labor force and they have not become part of the unemployment pool. Where do they go? They become part of a group called the economically inactive in the population. I don't know if they are joining gangs. I don't know if what they are doing, because we have to investigate that. I don't know where they are from. I don't know their gender. I don't know their age. And I think CSO should take a deeper look at this and provide the public from their database more information on who is leaving the labor force and characterize that gap. As a consequence, the unemployment rate, and on Monday the 4th, you would hear the Minister of Finance speak about the economy, and perhaps he would say that the unemployment rate in Trinidad and Tobago is still about 4.5% or 5% or thereabouts, which is world class. I mean, if you have an economy and you can keep the unemployment rate at about 4% or 5%, that is reflective of astutely good policies, of brilliant management. Except that if the people that left the labor force were counted as part of the unemployed, our unemployment rate would go up to about 10%. And so we have a dilemma where, when you talk about the unemployment rate, given the rise in the size of the economically inactive population, you run the risk of misrepresenting the state of the labor market. And in order to provide an accurate picture of the labor market, you need to, alongside providing information about the unemployment rate, provide information about the size of the economically inactive population. That's one. And two, the labor force participation rate, as a consequence of the trends in the size of the economically inactive population, is declining. And as we speak, it is about 54% from the last check I made, 54, 55%. Now, in the Bahamas in 2019, it was about 72%. So they are almost 20 percentage points higher than Trinidad and Tobago. Can you imagine the enormous difference in the geography of the production possibility frontier, or the production possibilities for Trinidad and Tobago, if our labor force participation rate was 70% instead of 54%? That's an enormous difference. Now, what the Venezuelan does and offers in the short run is if there is a 10% addition to the labor force, it increases the number of people that are willing to work.
Active,
And
yes.
these Venezuelans are more than willing to work. They are hungry to work because their very existence depends on their labor income. They don't have the benefits of the fallback of 27 billion in transfers and subsidies in any meaningful way. And so this is a chance, in my judgment, to interface both labor force, integrate them, use one to help with the work ethic of the other, and at the same point in time, capitalize on increasing the production of those goods in which your labor force were reluctant to go into. So we have an opportunity here that we need to sit down and put some thought towards. How can we convert this factor boom into an output boom? Because a factor boom that is not converted into an output boom could become a labor force problem. And that's where the economy is at now. And I think we need to hear from the Minister of Labour, that's my humble view, a strategy linked to the Ministry of Planning and to the Ministry of Trade that uses this existing factor of production to bail the economy out. That's an approach. And if you look at the importance of Spanish as a foreign language, I just did a paper with one of my PhD students, you would see that Spanish as a foreign language helps to increase exports to Spanish-speaking countries.
Obviously.
And there are therefore possibilities there.
Yeah, okay. All right, so agriculture, agro-processing, Venezuelans properly registered, assessed, that's to say for skills, and deployed. Taking into account, you are saying the Minister of Finance should accurate labor statistics. And secondly, the labor market realities, and using these things to create synergies that could help the country to develop and to grow. Now, these are some of the things that he must take into consideration, and some of the things that he must put into the budget. But what would you say that he absolutely, besides the things that you mentioned now, that's to say agriculture, the labor pool from the Venezuelan immigrants, etc., properly deployed, what else can he not avoid including in the budget? Or what else must he not avoid including in the budget?
Well, so the main thing I mentioned is he cannot avoid crowding growth, crowding economic growth. Another thing he cannot avoid, in my view, is he cannot avoid crowding in the non-energy export sector in a more meaningful way. You see, in my view, every conversation in this, I have looked at the medium term for this country for the next 5 years. And the growth prospects are not superstar level. They are moderate, very moderate. And it takes me back to the IMF report of April this year. And the IMF report is very telling. It's a very damning report on the Trinidad and Tobago economy. And when I say report, I'm talking about what the forecasted statistics say. And I'm going to answer your question specifically after I make this point. The forecasted, the actual statistic historical and the forecasted statistics tells the same story. One, from 2009 to 2019, Trinidad and Tobago was ranked in the top 25 worst performing economies in the world. Two, for the period 2020 to 2026, Trinidad and Tobago economy is still poised to be one of the top 25 worst performing economies in the world. So let's look at that a little closer in order for me to answer your question. If it is someone who were to come to you, Dr. Tiwari, and say the first 3 editions or 5 editions of your little program here was amongst the worst in Trinidad. And then the same person would say to you, the next 5 programs you are going to have will be amongst the worst in Trinidad. A prudent policymaker would say, okay, so I cannot change what went in my first 5 programs. Fair enough. Right. Let me look at what happened in my first 5 programs, at the structure of it that gave me this bad rating, this bad ranking, so that I would make a mockery of the forecast for the next 5 programs, and I would change all those things. So in a similar way here, if the Trinidad and Tobago economy is forecasted to be in the top 25 worst performing economies in the world for the period 20 to 26, then I would look at the structure of the economy and fix it so that that IMF forecast will not become a reality. Now, let us see how that transcribes into the budget. The fundamental problem in the Trinidad and Tobago economy, to the extent that every time you meet someone, you should ask them almost, I say this in a joke to my students, what are you doing for non-energy exports? And the Minister of Finance, if I dealt with growth first, the next main thing this budget cannot afford, it cannot ignore a massive focus on revitalizing non-energy exports, which if you look at the recent CSO trends, and I looked at it last night, from 2014 to 2020, it has been going down.
All down.
That's not what you want to see in an economy where oil and gas are basically sunset industries. So the minister, and I am saying specifically the Minister of Finance because I think he is someone who has capacity and who can think at great levels, I think he needs to sit back and look at this economy and see what can we do now to quadruple non-energy exports between now and 2025. And I saw you took a position, I think, yesterday in one of your articles. And if I were the Minister of Finance, I would start in 2025. I would start with non-energy exports 4 times the level it is now. And then I would walk myself backwards to 2021 yes. And see what were the steps I took. And then I would implement those steps. Now, what is going to work good and in the favor of the economy is that the manufacturing sector has a strategic plan that I believe involves the doubling of output between now and 2025. And that's what we want. We need to back up very strongly the manufacturing sector, because as the manufacturing sector achieves its objective and wins, Trinidad and Tobago economy wins via more jobs, more output, more backward and forward linkages, and mostly via foreign exchange. And so that's the approach I think he should take there. The e-tech parks, to me, is a tremendous asset. They involved a type of agglomeration that could be capitalized on. The specialized economic zones that we hear the Ministry of Trade talking about is another step in the right type of direction. The partial scope agreement with Chile is a step in the right direction. But what we need now is the action some of these things.
Yeah, we have to make them happen. Yes.
Yes. How do we look at these things and make transformative interventions that the IMF forecast from 2020 to 2026, which really bothers me, is made nonsensible. So the non-energy exports is the second one I would emphasize.
All right, let me stop you there. We are going to take a short break now, but when we come back, I want you to deal with the connection between 3 things: import substitution, expansion of exports, foreign exchange, sustainability.
Welcome to Lifetime Solutions, where you can trust your roof to us. Our services include custom fabrication, steel framing, roofing installation, on-site roll forming, roofing maintenance and services. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com. Lifetime Solutions. You can trust your roof to us. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com.
Your house is more than just a home. It's your new normal. It's your place of work, your kids' school, and even your gym. It's where you and your family spend most of your time. With over 43 years in the building service industry, let Magic Mist Services Limited take care of your home cleaning and maintenance needs. From ceiling to floor, interior and exterior, allowing you to focus on what matters most to you. Give us a call. Magic Mist Services Limited, your total facilities management solutions provider.
Welcome to Brighter Morning with Bo. My guest is Dr. Roger Hosein from the University of the West Indies and director of TEDU at UWI. And we're talking now about import substitution, foreign exchange, earnings, and exports. So one, import substitution is for saving foreign exchange. Export earnings are for increasing foreign exchange earnings. So we talk about that. Go ahead.
Okay. So, Dr. Tiwari, I looked at the ISI potential for Trinidad and Tobago. And there are little pockets we can capitalize on, but overall, it's not grand. It's not huge. And we have to be careful about forcing our ISI in areas that we are very far off from. Now, in the 1960s, in 1950s, 60s, and probably part of the 70s, many countries in the world, especially those of Latin America, tried ISI. And it failed miserably. It crashed their economies in big ways. It led them to massive debt and so on. I am not saying that would happen in Trinidad and Tobago at all. In fact, we tried some ISI in the 1960s and 70s, and it's also failed. What I'm saying is I looked at the scope for ISI, and whilst there are some small pockets, the scope for ISI is not as grand as we think. I think in agriculture there are some possibilities, and the ISI we need to look at must be more competitive ISI, competitive in import substitution industrialization that has the scope to save foreign exchange and has the capacity to even generate foreign exchange at some point in time in the future. So, but that requires a strong scientific approach. We have to use a methodology which is available in the literature to determine which are the sectors that we could contemplate import substituting industrialization and make that information available to the public so that the business people could make their own judgments and add their information onto the scientifically determined ISI areas and intervene accordingly. It's always best to let the free market deal with these interventions. But all 3 points that you mentioned are very interrelated. So the ISI would help to save on the use of some foreign exchange.
Right.
The expansion of exports is the other side. One is saving on foreign exchange, and the other, and the expansion of exports is generating foreign exchange. And there are two avenues: energy exports and non-energy exports. So on the energy export side, notwithstanding the whole lengthy discussion and conversation about A&V, drilling and whatnot, the lease out, farm out, IPSL body or group that does the drilling on land in mature wells, they have been doing really well. I think they account for about 20% of the production of petroleum when it fell under Petrotrin. of crude oil when it fell under Petrotrain. And it has been going. Now, my point is that if you are looking for export revenues and you have two avenues, energy and non-energy, in the energy sector, if by farming out mature wells to small-scale producers with low overhead cost, you can increase output, then I think an important strategy of the government has to be to identify a further 20% of its most mature wells and farm them out to private sector, smaller scale households that leads to a greater distribution of wealth, and that leads to a greater production from these wells because they can be more intensively pursued at lower cost of production. I think that's a consideration they should make. I also think that, there are opportunities in Suriname and Guyana for our energy sector, and working through the energy chamber and in conjunction with the governments of Suriname and the government of Guyana, we should see how we could encourage our domestic energy service capability, our domestic energy service sector firms to seek out more opportunities in Guyana and Suriname. The opportunities they are real. Those two economies are going to increase drastically in the next 10 years. And it's where we want to be one of the early movers with whatever skills we have in that regard to benefit. So that's another little area for opportunity. And in terms of the non-energy sector, I detailed that the e-tech parks are a very, very important conduit to generate foreign exchange, in my view. And I think if we make the e-tech park system more private sector managed with a mandate to export for revenues, I think that could be a change if we go in that direction. And one simple thing that I would encourage the Minister of Finance to do via the Ministry of Trade or direct the Ministry of Trade to do is I would take the top 100 non-energy exporting firms in Trinidad, and I would design a detailed survey instrument, and I would interview these 100 stakeholders and come up with a how to export manual. How to export manual so that the second 100 and the third 100 below this 100 top non-energy export firm would have a manual of how to export and overcome the obstacles that non-energy export firms experience in the region and extra-regionally, and in so doing, provide a cleaner avenue for these lower down the ladder firms to work in order to generate export revenues. I would also sit with the top 100 non-energy exporting firms and ask them, how can we double their non-energy exports within a 4-year period? And I would do what can be done once it's in the context of reason, once it does not adversely affect my foreign exchange, once it does not adversely affect my tax revenue. I would work with them, maybe in the context of the e-tech parks, to help them double their current output levels by 2025, so that Trinidad and Tobago can get even more non-energy export revenue, even more employment, and even more backward and forward linkages with the economy. So that's the approach I will take.
So your approach is a combination of sector strategies as well as company strategies, no?
Yes, all under a sort of trade rubric umbrella.
Yes.
So it
okay. Now, Roger, we're coming close to the hour when I have to leave. That's 8 o'clock. And we won't have much time for you to elaborate on anything now, but I want to give you a quick opportunity to talk about two things. One is the role of intellectual capital. I mean, if we have all these graduates from the university and we are not making use of them here and they are migrating, that is a terrible loss. And if we have a lot of talent in the society and they are being ignored, they are being pushed aside by the political system, then that also is an intellectual capital loss. Can you talk about that a little bit? And if you would simply recall from the roadmap what you think is valuable and what are its limitations, and therefore how we need to take these things into account in the budget. All right, you will only have about a minute and a half or so, okay?
Okay, so let me start with the second part of your comment.
Right.
In terms of the roadmap, I think the part of the roadmap that I found useful is the non-energy export part. It needed, in my opinion, more fleshing out. It needed, in my opinion, more detail and more rigor. But if we could get the non-energy, see, there is an aspect of the economic recovery document that takes us in the wrong direction towards non-tradables that will use up foreign exchange. I'm ignoring that altogether.
Yes.
But the aspect of the economic recovery document that takes us towards more tradables, I would push those more on the front burner in this budget and try in the 4-year period that we are talking about until 2025 to get more foreign exchange coming out of the non-energy export sector. Because Dr. Tiwari, in closing, the future and the medium term is simple. If we don't generate some non-energy export revenues, this economy is going to go to the IMF. That's my view.
Okay, so you want to close on that? You want to close on that?
Yeah, let's stop there.
All right. We've been talking to Roger Hosein. He made some very important points here, which I hope the Minister of Finance and the government will take into account. You don't have to take everything, but you should at least consider what he's saying. This is a thoughtful intervention on the condition of the economy now, prospects for the future if we continue as we're going, and the shifts we have to make in order to do something different, to make a difference. And more than that, you, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, I want to say that on Friday, I'm going to have an open forum in which you can call in. You can take the number now down, 609-6283, 609-6284, and have your say as to what you would like to see in the budget. I would be very grateful if you would call on Friday and let me know that. I'm going to dedicate a substantial part of the program for that, so you can take into account the things that Dr. Hosein has said and other people have said. And Dr. Hosein, I want to thank you very much for talking with me this morning. You always have something valuable to say, and I appreciate it. And you are a great guest. So, good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen on MCTV watching this morning. I am glad to have spent the last couple of hours with you. And I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, we will have two fine guests as usual. We always have good guests on this program, and we always talk serious issues. We don't waste time in bacchanal and nonsense. So we will take a focus on serious issues here. All right. Thank you very much for watching. This is Brighter Morning with Bo, and I am Bo Tiwari. Talk to you tomorrow.